Welcome to week 8 out of 20 of building the healthiest version of me. This week is the final week of taking you through my training, and that means that we are on deadlifts. So I put together a reel of my deadlift sessions for the week. I deadlift twice a week, and as I mentioned in my reel, I'm usually pretty warmed up by that point. The first time I deadlift, I've already benched and so already done a full warm-up, and the second time is an SBD session, so it's after squatting and benching, so I'm definitely warmed up. I do sometimes do a handful of kettlebell swings just to get the hinge movement locked in, make sure there's power going through those hips, and then straight into my warm-up sets. The first session of the week is a heavy Cohen, so either a single or a double, and that is where I've been getting my last couple of PBs. And then the second session of the week is, it's been like 3x3 or 4x2, or like it's more reps of, sorry, well it is more reps, but it's multiple sets as a top set. Does that make sense? And that is what we have been working with. My deadlifts have by far been the biggest transformation, I think, and I put up a transformation video from 3 years ago. I think I mentioned in the last video I like ummed and ahed over actually posting that because I find it so embarrassing. I'm gonna put the initial video here, and the issue with, there are so many issues with this, but I have no idea when I started deadlifting or who taught me to deadlift. I know that I was convinced that sumo deadlifts and conventional deadlifts were two completely separate lifts, and I mean, like, they do have completely separate qualities, but they're variations of the same lift. So I would do both, even though eventually realised that sumo deadlifts were not good for my hips, and not that I was doing them right anyway, so all of it was horrendous for my back. I actually don't know how I didn't hurt myself. But yeah, that is that video there. I think when I don't know when they started counting as actual deadlifts. I was definitely deadlifting properly with my first coach. I'm trying to think if I'd had some coaching before that on deadlifts specifically, but when I had Freddie as my coach, I started learning about bracing in a deadlift, and I can't really remember my deadlifts with Freddie. Obviously I did them a lot, but we played around with a lot of things. I know I was doing paused and deficit, so various variations, but all in all my deadlifts have come a very long way. If I think about my deadlifts from my competition in September to where they are now, that's a lot easier for me to remember, to be able to make the comparison. And what I was struggling with was understanding the neutral position. I am slightly Nordic in my lower back, so I felt naturally comfortable in a hyper-extended position, and as soon as I would then pull heavy off the floor, I would then try and naturally go into more of a neutral position because that's where I needed to be. But because I wasn't strong enough in that position, because I wasn't training in that position, I would then kind of freak out with the weight and dump it, basically. So as soon as we came out of comp last year, that was like the biggest focus, was just learning how I feel in a neutral position and building strength there. That has now come a long way. In September, my second attempt was 105 kilograms, which I lifted. My third attempt was 110 kilograms, which I didn't actually do. And I think a lot of that was mental. because I had tried it in training the week before or a couple of weeks before, and it hadn't come, it hadn't lifted, and I think I was just like panicking. But equally, I didn't know how to deadlift properly. I am pretty confident in my deadlift now. My bracing still needs some work. I don't really share this at all, but I do have a fairly weak pelvic floor in general, and I haven't quite mastered bracing in a way that supports my pelvic floor. So there are sessions where when I'm lifting a bit heavier, I don't have as much control as I would like, and that sometimes is a little bit off-putting when you're deadlifting. So my bracing definitely needs some work still, but my positioning is a hell of a lot better, and I would say we are now kind of fine-tuning some little bits before the next comp. But I'm super excited around my deadlifts. My last PB was 125 kilograms, which is double body weight, and I'm over the moon with. And I haven't really got a goal weight in mind, especially by the time I compete. I'd like to think 130 will be in there somewhere. I'm not too sure if more than that is going to be there. I really don't know. And I think deadlifts is the hardest one mentally. Definitely put the most pressure on it. I also think, if I think back to comp day, because it's the last lift, especially if everything else has gone perfectly, it does feel like you really want to make that one perfect and overthink it massively to try and make sure of that. Whereas really going in with a clear headspace and just focusing on the form is a lot better. What I've been doing when I'm deadlifting is honestly approaching the bar from like the sidelines, imagining I am waiting to get onto the platform, and then having the same setup every single time. And I'm hoping that that then means I feel a little bit more comfortable when I do actually step onto the platform. I would also say, and I did include a little video at the end of my reel of my RDLs, that learning how to RDL has been a whole journey on its own, but has definitely helped my deadlifts come a long way. I have always really struggled with RDLs because, again, not understanding a neutral position has therefore meant that I feel it a lot in my lower back. I also struggle to hinge more on one side than the other. So a lot of the time in my physio sessions, we kind of identify that one of my hips just doesn't have as much range in terms of a hinge movement, and my back then kind of compensates for that. So training the hinge pattern has been a long journey. I also just think that so many people, when they're RDLing, especially because I obviously coach it as well, a lot of people just think you're bending over to get the dumbbells as close to the floor as possible, trying not to bend your knees, and it is a lot more than that. I do want to just caveat in here that I didn't coach RDLs until I understood 100% how to do them myself, and I would be quite open with clients if they specifically would ask me to coach them. You know, like some people would say, we do this in a class, can you just go through it with me? And I would say, like, I can explain what you're supposed to be doing, but I haven't actually nailed it myself. I find it one of the most difficult lifts, so give me a little bit of time and we'll come back to it. And everybody's obviously super understanding of that. They want to be coached by someone that knows what they're doing, and I would never pretend that I'd completely got the grasp of it if I hadn't. So I spent a good couple of months really mastering how to do it myself before I would coach clients. I just wanted to caveat that in there. But we tried all sorts and eventually learnt what the hinge movement was, learnt what position I should be in, and learnt what cues work best for me. In particular, I focus on keeping my big toe gripped into the floor because a lot of weight was shifting when I was moving, and that was going into the wrong place, and that was one of the reasons I was feeling my lower back. So making sure that I had a really steady center of mass. So making sure I had a really steady center of mass was a big one. So I always make sure, I never do it with shoes on, make sure that my big toe is grounded in the floor. Then always think about keeping my core nice and tight so that my back can stay straight. So one of my cues to my clients is, imagine you're being punched in the stomach. You want to keep your core really tight. Your hips are then the one that are moving, not your knees, or you're not leaning over. Your hips go back. And I think one of the biggest things that Callum was telling me is don't be afraid to let your chest follow forward. You don't want to like round over, but we shouldn't be kind of keeping that position out there. So as my hips are going back, my chest is following basically. And it did take maybe a block to just keep doing the same thing with a fairly light weight, getting to grips with it, and then I would feel pretty confident. And since then the weights have been going up quite nicely, and I'm super happy with that, and definitely think that that relays over into my actual deadlifts. And understanding the neutral position and feeling that the hip hinge is in the right place is something that I'm still working on transferring over like perfectly, but we're getting there, and I definitely feel it helps. So all in all, that is deadlifts. I think this whole series I've really struggled to say which lift has made the biggest transformation and which lift I actually enjoy the most. I think they are all equal across both. All three lifts have had such big transformations in very different ways, and I don't have a favourite or a least favourite out of the three. Sometimes it can change literally day to day, but overall it's really hard to say, which I guess is lucky, meaning that we have to do all three, and I enjoy and don't enjoy all three. So that has been this week's reel. I hope that's been an interesting insight into my training, and if you want to know any more specifically about my training, please do let me know. So that is that. I haven't actually yet decided what I'm gonna do from here with this series. We're almost halfway now, and I did put a little box on my story saying like, what else do you want to see, but no help was given. So I will see you next week with something that is a surprise to both you and me. Hopefully I think up something good. So I'm gonna leave this one here. If you have enjoyed seeing these insights into my training, please give it a thumbs up, leave a little comment if you want to. Feel free to ask any questions down below, and I will see you again next week. Bye.